I was the only human for billions of kilometers. That's what I believed, until the station stopped behaving like a machine. Outpost K-47 drifted above an ice moon that reflected no sunlight, only the dull glow of its parent gas giant. From orbit, the moon looked cracked, like a frozen ocean shattered midstorm. The station hung in synchronous rotation, an aging mineral relay platform repurposed as a long-term storage archive. That was the official designation. Legacy Infrastructure Preservation Site. Which meant forgotten. I'm a maintenance contractor, licensed for obsolete alien systems, low-tier reactor arrays, and structural stabilization. I don't explore ruins. I don't chase mysteries. I keep old things from collapsing until someone higher up decides whether they're worth salvaging. 6-month contract. Isolation bonus. No crew. The corridors curved in non-human geometries, alloy walls grown seamless instead of welded. The air carried the metallic tang of ionized coolant and recycled dust. Every few hours, stress fractures in the ice moon below echoed faintly through the docking pylons, like distant thunder trapped in vacuum. Machines are honest. When they fail, they do it predictably. That's why I noticed the anomaly immediately. Reactor 3 adjusted output by 0.8% at 312 station cycle. No drone deployment. No scheduled archival shift. No environmental demand increase. Just a brief, precise spike in energy draw from a sector listed as inactive. I pulled up the grid map. Sublevel 9 flickered faintly on the schematic, then disappeared again. There was no Sublevel 9 in my contract files. But something down there had just asked for power. Sublevel 9 wasn't on any public schematic. But the station's architecture didn't lie. Power had moved. That meant something existed to receive it. I traced the draw through maintenance conduits and found a seam behind a thermal regulation panel I'd inspected twice before. The alloy there was smoother than the surrounding wall, grown later, not original. The hatch didn't resist my contractor override. That bothered me more than if it had. The door irised open without a sound. Cold air spilled out, not the recycled chill of a neglected outpost, but a controlled, preserved cold. My breath fogged instantly. The corridor beyond curved gently downward, walls seamless and faintly luminous. No exposed conduits. No corrosion. No frost creeping along the seams. Too clean. Too silent. Even the subtle vibration of distant reactor hum felt dampened here, as if the space had been acoustically isolated from the rest of the station. My boots echoed softly as I walked. At the end of the corridor, the space widened into a chamber large enough to house a cargo freighter. The lights brightened gradually as I stepped inside. Rows. Concentric arcs of cryogenic vaults stretching outward in precise symmetry. Stacked 3 tiers high. Transparent upper panels rimmed with frost. Each one containing a still figure. It felt like a cemetery without death. I moved closer to the nearest pod. The being inside was not human. Her features were refined, elongated limbs, high cheek structure, dark hair suspended weightlessly in frozen suspension fluid. Her skin carried a faint opalescent tone beneath the frost. I turned slowly. They were all like that. All women. 1,000 preserved bodies arranged with museum precision. My wrist console vibrated. Cryostasis array. 1,000 occupants. Status. Archival preservation. Security tier. Sovereign directive. Archive. That was the word in my contract. I walked along the arc of pods, reading identical blue status indicators. Stable. 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 Until one shifted. Pod 347, A glowed amber. Neural fluctuation detected. Stasis degradation, 2.3% and increasing. The frost along her viewing panel had thinned slightly, revealing closed eyelids twitching faintly beneath. The system interface expanded automatically in my field of vision. Manual intervention available. Test revival sequence, single unit. Warning: activation voids preservation compliance. I stared at the prompt. This wasn't in my scope of work. Do not interfere with archived assets. That clause had seemed procedural when I signed. Now it felt heavier. If I did nothing, Pod 347A would fail. The system would log degradation. The archive would lose one preserved specimen. Specimen. The amber indicator flickered again. 2.8%. Machines are honest. If something is breaking, you fix it. I exhaled slowly. This is maintenance, I muttered to the empty chamber. Nothing else. There was no surge of righteousness. No sense of destiny. Just reluctance. And a failing system. My finger hovered for a second longer than necessary. Then I pressed the activation key. The pod responded instantly. Internal lights flared white. Frost fractured across the viewing panel in crystalline veins. Coolant drained with a sharp hiss, vapor spilling into the chamber air. Inside, her body convulsed once, hard and involuntary. The lid split along its seam and lifted. For a heartbeat, the chamber was silent. Then she inhaled, and her silver eyes opened. She didn't thrash. She didn't scream. She breathed. Slowly at first, like someone testing whether air was still permitted. Then deeper, steadier. Her silver eyes remained fixed on me as sensation returned to her limbs. Condensation rolled from her skin in thin streams, pooling at the edge of the open pod. She pushed herself upright with measured control. No panic. No confusion. Just awareness. "You are not Imperial," she said. Her voice was low, precise. Not fearful. Not accusatory. "No," I answered. "Maintenance contractor." She swung her legs over the side of the pod and stood, taller than me by a few centimeters, balanced despite centuries of stillness. Her gaze moved over my jacket, my boots, the diagnostic pad still clutched in my hand. "Species designation?" she asked. "Human." The word seemed to settle into her expression. She stepped down from the platform, bare feet touching the cold alloy floor without flinching. "You are alone," she observed. "Yeah." A faint tilt of her head. "Studying. Calculating. You activated my chamber intentionally." "Yes." "Why?" I considered deflecting, blaming a systems test. An error. Instead, I told the truth. Your pod was destabilizing. You were about to fail. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought. "You intervened," she said. "That's my job." A small pause followed. Then she stepped closer. Close enough that I could see faint geometric patterns beneath the opalescent tone of her skin, biological, not artificial. Close enough that the air between us felt warmer than the rest of the chamber. She lifted her hand slowly, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. Her fingers brushed the back of my glove. Light contact. Testing. Warm. Her brows shifted almost imperceptibly. "You are not preserved." "No." "You continue. Normally?" "Mostly." She turned her hand and pressed her palm fully against mine. The warmth was steady, alive. Not suspended. Not archived. Her expression changed then, subtle but real. Not awe. Not gratitude. Interest. Behind us, 999 pods remained dark and silent. 1,000 frozen figures preserved in perfect stillness. But the chamber no longer felt empty. She lowered her hand slowly, still watching me. And for the first time since arriving on this station, I realized something unexpected. I didn't want it to go quiet again. Her name was Celes. She told me that without ceremony, as if names were tools, necessary, not ornamental. "Others are here," she said, turning slowly to take in the endless arcs of pods. Her expression remained composed, but something deeper moved behind her eyes. Recognition. Memory. I pulled the system interface back up. Pod 347B showed optimal stability. Then 347C. Then 348A. "They're viable," I said. "Sequential revival is possible." Celes regarded the chamber. If they were preserved, they were not meant to wake. That hasn't stopped anything so far. She studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. Not approval. Acceptance. I initiated the second pod. This awakening was sharper. The lid split open and the woman inside surged upright before the coolant had fully drained. Her silver eyes flashed, scanning the chamber with immediate threat assessment. Muscles coiled. Shoulders squared. She stepped out in one fluid motion and positioned herself slightly in front of Sally's without being asked. "Status," she demanded. Her voice carried heat, controlled but unmistakable. Sally's answered calmly. "Imperial absence. Independent activation." The Fierce One's gaze snapped to me. "You initiated release." "Yes." Her eyes traveled over me, measuring height, posture, visible strength. "You are not enhanced," she observed. "No." A flicker passed across her expression. Not contempt. Calculation recalibrating. "I am Vale," she said. "Maintenance contractor," I replied. "That is not a name. It's what you need to know." For a moment, the air between us tightened, not hostility, but friction. Fire meeting neutrality. Vale stepped aside at last, though she remained alert, scanning the chamber perimeter as if expecting armed retrieval units to descend from the ceiling. The third pod opened more gently. The woman inside emerged slowly, blinking as sensation returned. When her feet touched the floor, her knees wavered. Sally's moved first, but I was closer. I caught her before she fell. Her skin was warm, warmer than the preserved chill of the chamber. She steadied herself with one hand on my sleeve, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you," she said softly. Her gaze lifted to mine, not sharp like Vale's, not analytical like Sally's. Gentle. Aware. "Elira," Sally said. Elira smiled faintly at the sound of her name. She looked around at the other pods, and instead of tension, something like sorrow crossed her features. "So many," she whispered. Vale exhaled quietly. "Then we wake them." There was no competition among them. No vying for position. Just different currents of strength. Sally's anchored the space, calm, centered, already thinking ahead. Vale carried fire, protective instinct simmering just beneath the surface. Elira adjusted the environmental controls without being asked, raising the chamber temperature slightly so newly awakened bodies would not shock against the cold alloy floor. They moved naturally into roles. Alive again. I initiated another pod. Then another. Each awakening added a new presence, a new breath drawn into the chamber. Voices began to echo softly. Confusion shifted to understanding as Sally spoke to each in turn. Through it all, I remained at the console. Not leader. Not savior. Just the one who had pressed a button. At some point, I became aware of something subtle. When Sally's addressed the newly awakened, her eyes occasionally flicked toward me. When Vale completed a perimeter scan, she paused briefly, watching my hands on the controls. When Elira steadied another woman, she glanced back as if confirming I was still there. Not dependency. Not gratitude. Assessment. I was the only unfamiliar element in a reality that had just restarted. And they were all watching me, quietly deciding what that meant. The cryostasis controls weren't the whole system. Power routing suggested a secondary core buried beneath sublevel 9, an archive partition shielded behind sovereign encryption. If this was truly an archival preservation site, there would be documentation. Empires documented everything. I accessed the lower partition. Imperial crest unfolded across the display, sharp geometry, authoritarian symmetry. Clearance markers stacked in descending tiers of authority long extinct. The file headers were pristine. Subject population, high strategic cohort. Classification, governance lineage, autonomous sector. Assessment, ideological divergence, non-compliant. I felt Sally's step closer beside me. The next line scrolled into view. Primary recommendation, public execution and dissolution of command structure. Vale's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The recommendation had been denied. Revised directive. Public destruction deemed destabilizing. Symbolic loss would generate martyrdom cascade. Alternative action authorized. I kept reading. Population to be removed from public record. Transferred under preservation mandate. Converted into a living warning. The words sat on the screen, clinically arranged. Converted into a living warning. Elira's breath caught almost imperceptibly. Sally's did not move. Further documentation clarified the rationale. Objective: eliminate ideological contagion without violent spectacle. Method: long-term cryogenic suspension. Narrative adjustment: voluntary strategic retreat pending integration. A lie written in administrative tone. Destruction is loud. Preservation can be crueler. They hadn't been killed because killing them would have made them symbols. So the Empire erased them. No funerals. No memorials. No battle. Just disappearance. An entire leadership class, fleet tacticians, planetary governors, cultural architects, removed from history and placed into suspended display across forgotten holdings. 1,000 minds frozen in perfect silence so the rest of the galaxy would learn the lesson without seeing blood. Vale spoke first, voice steady but edged with heat. They feared continuity. Yes, Sayles said quietly. We represented persistence. I scrolled further. Reactivation protocol. Prohibited. Violation classification. Treason against imperial stability. Automatic alert trigger. Enabled upon unauthorized mass revival. My stomach tightened. Alert trigger. Is it active? I asked. Sayles studied the system architecture. Dormant, she said after a moment. The network it would signal is degraded. Abandoned prison. Forgotten wardens. Still a prison. I leaned back against the console. No shouting. No dramatic outrage. Just a slow, controlled burn under my ribs. I'd woken 3 out of 1,000. 997 still trapped in bureaucratic limbo, preserved not for mercy, but for intimidation. I looked across the chamber. Rows of silent pods glowing faint blue. They weren't archived artifacts. They were political hostages. Archive, I muttered. That's what the contract called this. Sayles turned her gaze to me. It is an archive, she said softly. Of resistance. The weight of it settled in. The Empire hadn't built this chamber to preserve history. They'd built it to contain it. To ensure that dissent never died loudly enough to inspire anyone. My quiet anger sharpened into clarity. This wasn't a storage facility. It wasn't a relic site. It was a monument to suppression. And standing in the center of it, I understood something with complete certainty. This wasn't an archive. It was a prison. I pulled my contract back up. Outpost K, 47, Legacy Infrastructure Maintenance. Scope, Reactor Calibration, Drone Oversight, Cryostasis Stabilization. Restrictions, do not interfere with archived Imperial assets. Penalty, immediate blacklisting. Asset seizure. Civil liability. Do not interfere. At the time, it had sounded procedural. Legal insulation against contractors getting curious. Now it read like an instruction to preserve injustice. Behind me, 3 women stood awake in a chamber built to silence them. 997 remained suspended. Sayles didn't urge me. Vale didn't demand action. Elira simply watched the others still frozen in arcs of blue light. No one asked. That made the decision heavier. I opened the power matrix and expanded the cryostasis grid to full scale. 1,000 pods in minimal suspension mode consumed only baseline reactor output. Neural activity nearly flat. Metabolism near 0. Full revival would spike energy draw beyond standard safety thresholds. At first glance, impossible. I recalculated. Reactor 1 operating at 64% capacity. Reactor 2 at 59%. Reactor 3 at 72%. Half the station's external systems were idle, cargo bays unused, communication arrays dormant, mining drones offline pending seasonal thaw cycles on the ice moon. I ran a simulation. If I shut down non-essential sectors, if I rerouted auxiliary reserves, if I staged revival in controlled batches, the power curves stabilized. Barely. It would strain the grid, I said aloud. Vale stepped closer. Failure probability. Non-zero. Sayles studied the projection. Detection probability. I expanded the alert protocols flagged in the archive. The original alert network is degraded, I said. But mass activation will generate a signal spike. Any surviving Imperial watchdog AI in range could register it. And if they do? Vale asked. We'd be marked hostile. Elira's gaze remained on the frozen pods. We already are, she said quietly. I leaned forward over the console. This wasn't heroism. It wasn't rebellion. It was arithmetic. 1,000 suppressed leaders. 1 decaying prison. 1 maintenance contractor with temporary authority over the system. Do not interfere. I considered walking away, finishing my 6-month rotation, logging Sublevel 9 as a sealed archive anomaly, leaving with my pay intact. The pods would continue humming. The Empire's quiet cruelty would remain undisturbed. I ran the numbers again. Sequential revival in batches of 10. Thermal stabilization windows between cycles. Manual override of beacon arrays. Hard shutdown of outbound communications. It was possible. Dangerous. Irreversible. But possible. Sally's watched my face, not my hands. You understand this alters your trajectory, she said. Yes. You owe us nothing. I know. Vale's voice was steady. Then why continue calculating? I stared at the power graph until the lines blurred slightly. Because the system was wrong. Because preservation had been weaponized. Because a machine designed to suppress life was still running perfectly, and I was qualified to change that. I straightened slowly. I'm not promising outcomes, I said. I'm not claiming we can control what happens after. No speeches. No declarations. Just truth. If it can be done, I continued quietly, then it must be done. The words didn't echo. They settled. I accessed the master cryostasis control. Batch revival protocol. Disabled. Manual sequential override. Available. Estimated system surge. Severe. Confirm full array activation. Behind me, 3 sets of silver eyes waited, not pleading, not commanding. Witnessing. The chamber remained still, 1,000 futures suspended in blue-lit silence. I placed my finger over the confirmation key, and let it hover. I pressed confirm. The station answered with a roar. Reactor output surged so violently the deck plates vibrated under my boots. Power conduits along the chamber walls flared white-blue as energy flooded into the cryostasis grid. Frost spiderwebbed across hundreds of viewing panels at once, cracking in branching fractures. Stabilize, stabilize, I muttered, eyes locked on the cascading power curves. The first wave triggered. 10 pods. Coolant vented in sharp hisses, vapor spilling low across the floor. Lids split open with synchronized hydraulic sighs. Bodies jerked once as sensation returned. Then, breaths. Ragged. Deep. Uncertain. Coughing echoed through the chamber. The second wave initiated before the vapor had cleared. Another 10. Then another. Sound built gradually, not chaos, but rupture. Silence breaking after centuries of compression. Vale was already moving, catching one woman as she stumbled forward, bracing her with firm hands. Sally stood at the center of a growing cluster, voice calm and steady as she oriented the newly awakened. You are safe. The Empire is absent. Breathe. Elira knelt beside another who had collapsed to her knees, brushing condensation from her face and guiding her breathing rhythm. Women helped women. Those who found balance first reached immediately for those who had not. No one stood alone for long. Sequential activation rippled outward in concentric arcs. Rows that had been museum still came alive in rolling motion. Frost cascaded in crystalline sheets. Coolant pooled and drained through grates unused for generations. I monitored everything. Thermal thresholds. Structural stress. Reactor strain. Energy reserves dipped into auxiliary banks as non-essential systems across the station powered down. Exterior lights dimmed. Communication arrays went dark. All power redirected inward. To them. Voices rose, some sharp with confusion, some trembling with disbelief. A few wept openly as awareness returned fully and memory followed. They preserved us, one whispered. No, Vale answered firmly. They contained us. 1,000 preserved warnings becoming 1,000 waking minds. I had expected disorder. Instead, I witnessed reconstruction. They reorganized instinctively. Small groups formed around familiar faces. Leaders emerged without announcement. Sally's calm steadied entire sections of the chamber. Vale established perimeter security without being told. Elira moved constantly, ensuring no one remained disoriented or alone. I stood at the console, overwhelmed by scale. 1,000 isn't a number. It's 1,000 futures restarting. Each pod represented a strategist, a scientist, a cultural architect. Each breath drawn now reintroduced threads into a galaxy that had declared them erased. The sound shifted gradually. From coughing, to murmured conversation, to steady breathing. The final sector cued. "Last array," I said quietly. Energy reserves dipped again. Reactor 3 trembled near its red threshold. I rerouted from cargo hold climate control, empty space sacrificing comfort for life. The final row ignited. Pods split open in a bright cascade. Coolant drained in shimmering sheets. The last suspended figures stirred, silver eyes opening to light. Those already standing turned to watch. Not cheering. Witnessing. One by one, the final 10 stepped free of their pods. The chamber quieted, not silent, but unified. The master console chimed. Cryostasis array status. All units. Active. Preservation mode. Terminated. I looked up slowly. 1,000 silver gazes met mine. Not worship. Not submission. Recognition. I hadn't intended to become anything. But in that moment, a lone human amid resurrected history, I felt the weight settle fully onto my shoulders. Responsibility. Behind me, the final pod indicator shifted from blue to green. The last light changed. Final pod lights green. It took time to turn a prison back into a departure point. 3 days of recalibration. We powered up hangars that hadn't opened in centuries. Mining transports were stripped of industrial fittings and refitted for life support. Cargo carriers became temporary shuttles. Navigation arrays were realigned to map a galaxy that had moved on without them. No one celebrated. They prepared. Groups formed naturally, clusters of expertise, memory, shared history. Fleet tacticians coordinating routes. Scientists assessing data drift across centuries. Cultural archivists reconstructing what had been erased. Sally's moved among them like a fixed star, quietly stabilizing, never commanding loudly, but anchoring every conversation. Vale oversaw security sweeps of every system before launch, ensuring no dormant Imperial subroutine remained to betray them. Elira organized medical rotations, checking neural recovery patterns, steady hands, and softer words. When the first shuttle detached from Outpost K-47, there was no speech. Engines flared white against the ice moon's fractured horizon. Then it was gone. Others followed in measured intervals. The station grew lighter with each departure. Corridors that had once echoed with 1,000 revived voices slowly returned to quiet, but not the suffocating silence of preservation. This was a living quiet. Some paused before boarding. A hand placed briefly over my forearm. A nod. Direct eye contact that said more than words. Not worship. Not debt. Acknowledgement. Vale approached before her departure window. "You altered a variable the Empire believed permanent," she said. "I adjusted a system," I replied. A faint shift touched her expression. Approval, restrained. "We will ensure the adjustment persists." She turned without further ceremony and boarded. Elira lingered longer. She adjusted the cuff of my jacket, brushing away imaginary frost. "You will not return to silence," she said gently. "I've handled worse," I answered. She looked unconvinced, but not worried. Then she stepped onto her shuttle ramp and disappeared inside. Sally's was among the last. We stood together in the observation bay overlooking the ice moon's cracked surface. The gas giant loomed massive and indifferent beyond. "Our civilization will not resume as it was," she said. "Nothing ever does." She studied the void for a long moment. "You acted without leverage," she said. "Without promise of gain." I pressed a button. "You changed a trajectory." Another shuttle launched below us, curving into starlight. Her assigned transport powered up in the adjacent hangar. She didn't move toward it. "You're missing your departure window," I said. "Yes." I waited. She turned to face me fully. "I remain," she said. "Why?" She considered carefully, not impulsively, not sentimentally. "Because freedom is not only departure," she said. "It is choosing where to stand." There was no weight of obligation in her tone. No repayment. Just decision. Outside the viewport, the final shuttle vanished into distant darkness. The station's traffic grid cleared. Reactor output stabilized to sustainable levels. External arrays remained dark, by choice this time. Billions of kilometers from the nearest human. Not alone. I leaned against the console railing, watching the empty starfield. "I didn't free them for gratitude," I said quietly. Saley stood beside me, silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. I pressed a button because it was right. She inclined her head once. Beyond the hull, 1,000 futures moved outward, carrying their own decisions into the galaxy. She stayed. And that was her choice.